It's October 9th. Thanks for watching. I'm Matt Reardon. We're starting with the continental U.S. radar view this morning. I'm going to get this out of the way quickly because there's really just not much going on. It kind of belies what I think is a pretty active weather pattern that's on its way, not only here kind of today with some cold temperatures in the Northeast, but rainfall for the Four Corners, which we're going to talk about. Flood watches posted for the desert Southwest there, even into like California. We do see some shower returns here, like the Carolina coastline over in Washington and Oregon. You can see some showers crossing the state line there, but largely calm across much of the country. Now, I think really this video here today, a lot of the cards for like the middle to late part of October, even early November, actually lie far away from what this view shows us here. I think we're needing, or at least we're going to need to focus on like the West Pacific, some typhoon activity that's occurring now and maybe in the future, but also what's happening over in like Siberia, what's happening over in the Himalayas may play a role and where that temperature forecast goes, and ultimately potentially some precipitation forecast for the west coast of the U.S. and beyond. So we'll look at all that in the video, actually more so toward the end of it. I do want to touch on, we kind of mentioned waiting for these colder temperatures here in October. If you're kind of in the upper Midwest or the New England, they have arrived. We actually finally have that kind of fall weather. And you can see the map getting more colorful with those blue colors. We know that means frost and freeze advisories typically. You can see this kind of lighter blue color here. Those are our frost advisories. We actually have freezing conditions out for much of Wisconsin, freeze warnings out for the lower peninsula here in Michigan. Temperatures have fallen below 30 degrees Fahrenheit here this morning. Frost advisories below that. Freeze watch out for portions of the Appalachians here, kind of on the western side of the plateau. And then the freeze warnings all the way from Maine, across all the New England states, even into much of New York, Pennsylvania, frost advisories on kind of the lee side of that there. And then if we jump over to the southwest, flood watches for much of the Four Corners region, southern Nevada, southeastern California, much of Arizona, Utah, southwestern Colorado. A little bit earlier, like Tuesday and at the end of last week, the trajectory of Priscilla's moisture, which is ultimately prompting these flood watches, was forecast to move a bit more east, like where I thought these flood watches would be posted, frankly, like when I woke up here today, earlier this week, was something more like this. And so those have shifted back west, and that's changed where some of this best precipitation is going to go. Honestly, more so over some populated regions of the lower Colorado River Valley, so we'll have to talk about that too. If we look at those current temperatures here this morning, let's look at those valid. We're just approaching 6 a.m. Central Time. You can see below 30s in Michigan, Wisconsin, getting down into the 30s or low 40s across New England. We'll say the freeze watches, warnings, advisories posted kind of east of this line here are more so for tomorrow. Whereas what you saw today, these colder temperatures are already accounted for. So expecting colder temperatures tomorrow morning. I'll jump through those in a second here. And actually, let's just do that now. Let's look at those minimum temperatures. Let's do here this morning on Thursday. We're not quite this cold in some of those areas that we just saw, but down into the 40s, certainly for a wide area here, closer to like 28, 29 in this corridor. But if I take it to tomorrow on Friday morning, see those temperatures getting quite a bit colder across New England, across Pennsylvania, Ohio, down into the 30s, even like Indiana, portions of like far eastern Illinois down into the mid to upper 30s here, prompting that frost advisory. Warming up on the backside in Wisconsin, I mentioned these advisories more so here just for today on Thursday as that cold air shifts to the east behind the cold front, which is leaving the continental U.S. here today. Now, while I'm here, I might as well play this forecast out. So we are warming up on the backside of it here Saturday. Still relatively cool and fall-like across the Midwest. That continues on Sunday morning, but warming up quickly in the plains. Relative warm up here across the Mid-Atlantic and New England. And the next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the heat relative for the middle of October. But certainly that kind of return to the warm, drier-like conditions is back for the central U.S. and portions of the eastern U.S. Now, I do want to jump back because I mentioned of the tropical activity in the West Pacific. We do have some a little bit closer to home to keep an eye on. I did want to call out Priscilla because its moisture plume is prompting those flood watches across that corridor that we just talked about. But Priscilla has lost a lot of its organization down to a tropical storm, I believe, here this morning. And so you really lost all that thunderstorm activity. Often, you'll notice when I do these videos, if I'm talking about an East Pacific storm, I kind of pick Cabo here. I draw a line toward the southwest. The water temperatures kind of in a line here start to cool off very quickly. When these tropical systems cross that line, they weaken predictably very fast, as Priscilla has done here. Now, curiously, there is another tropical storm just to the south of Priscilla. Let's refresh that and see if they still have it. Yeah, there's Octave. If you remember from earlier this week, Priscilla was like here and Octave was over here. And because of that Fujiwara effect, Priscilla went this way. They kind of orbit around one another. Octave went that way, sneaking Octave underneath it, which is now, essentially a puff of thunderstorms. No kind of obvious low to me at this point. Maybe if we look a little bit closer, we'd find it. But Octave certainly on its way out of the picture here in terms of a serious system. And then it doesn't take, a keen eye to see, well, we have something going on back here closer to the coast of Mexico. And sure enough, the National Hurricane Center identifying this area here for potential future development, 80% chance of cyclone formation in 7 days. So the Eastern Pacific remains active. That's clear just from the National Hurricane Center here this morning with all the kind of the red colors here, just at a quick glance. One kind of forecast implication of this is when we have an active East Pacific, we often see at least the Western Atlantic quell in activity. So when this goes active, we often see just over the isthmus here, Central America, much less activity. And kind of a simple reason for that is what goes up in the atmosphere tends to go down elsewhere. So that's part of it. We also have wind shear. These storms, especially when they're stronger, produce quite a bit of wind shear. Even kind of strong collections of tropical thunderstorms like we have here are producing quite a bit of outflow. That outflow, realized in the form of wind shear, often forms downstream, or to the east in this case. And tropical systems, when they're developing, when they're young, they don't like that wind shear. So that wind shear over here tends to preclude or prevent development of systems closer to where they might make landfall in the U.S. So when we have these kind of big years in the East Pacific, we tend to have quieter years over here. And that has been the case this year. We're all the way over to the P storm here in the Eastern Pacific, and over in the Atlantic, we're on Jerry, the J storm. And so if I just show you the wind shear across the Gulf, like right now here this morning, see what that activity over here in the East Pacific, we have a lot of wind shear in these darker colors here, and kind of your lack of wind shear further east over here, like west of where Jerry is currently, or in this pocket here north of the Greater Antilles. So, and that's expected to continue. If I play this forecast forward, we have some weak troughing here across the southeast, and quite a bit of wind shear in this corridor, preventing any serious development all the way out into next week. This was a concern we watched going into October. Was something going to sneak out of here and get into the Gulf? Doesn't look like that's going to be the case anytime soon. I did want to jump over to the West Pacific. I mentioned this at the beginning of the video. Kind of orient ourselves here. Here's Japan and China. See Southeast Asia here. This is kind of Indonesia. This is that North Pacific jet stream, which we track. It is particularly strong just off Japan right now. And if you look closely, this little hitch here, that's actually underneath that is Typhoon Halong. And all the convection associated with that system is starting to impart a lot of momentum into the jet stream. That's starting to break up a bit here across the North Pacific into Alaska. And this is adding some forecast variability, especially next week in terms of the precipitation, where that forecast is going out between the ECMWF and the GFS. We'll look at that in a bit. So seeing the uncertainty that this typhoon and this Pacific jet increasing in strength might have on our forecast next week is going to be interesting. I'll take a look at that in just a few slides here. Jump over it, we can see tropical storm here to the south of Halong. Here's Halong, kind of almost east of Tokyo at this point, getting out of that warmer water. I like this plot here. This is from polarweather.com, because it shows you those sea surface temperatures. So you notice Halong getting out of the best warmth and likely weakening, but it's already had that influence on the jet stream that we'll have to account for. Now, I do want to jump over. Let's look at the upper level height pattern before we get going into the precipitation forecast across the U.S. There's that trough. We can kind of sense that just looking at those showers moving south to north across Oregon and Washington. That's positioned off British Columbia, off Washington here this morning, almost kind of cut off from the broader flow to the north. We have that weak trough that I mentioned, helping to bring some of that wind shear across the Gulf. That's situated across getting close to Nashville here. And then there is Priscilla. And then keep an eye on this little hitch, this little what we call shortwave trough. So if I had to identify 4 features, to keep an eye on here, I'd say 1, this trough, because that's going to be slowly moving on shore in the west, bringing precipitation here. 2, so let's call that 1. Let's call the second one Priscilla. That's going to bring precipitation up in here. We're going to talk about that in a second, up into the lower Colorado River Valley. If I had to talk about 3, it's this weak upper level trough over the southeast. That's going to continue to dive down into the Gulf like this. We saw that with some of that wind shear across the Gulf and the northern Caribbean. And There's a lot of warm water down here. There's a lot of potential for showers and thunderstorms. So as that trough sneaks down here, while it's not necessarily good for like proper tropical cyclone development, it is good for precipitation and rainfall. And we're actually going to see a coastal low develop in association with this trough. You'll see that as we go through the precipitation forecast in just a few slides. And that was at 1, let's do 2, 3, we can count. And this is for the shortwave trough. Now, we talked about this trough on Tuesday being very weak as it came through the Midwest. It's actually increased in strength a little bit, and there's going to be a little bit of moisture associated with this. So as the next 2 days occur, that's going to be diving south out of Canada, crossing into the upper Midwest. So we're just going to bring a little bit of a low pressure system through the Great Lakes and some rainfall in the forecast at maybe tomorrow and into Saturday. Not a lot, very light amounts, but more so than we thought maybe on Tuesday. I'll start with the 3-kilometer NAM forecast, the simulated radar. Let's play this forecast. Let's get it into like lunchtime today on Thursday. Here's noon Central Time, just some light showers across the Pacific Northwest, light showers across the Southeast. Here's Priscilla bringing some showers up into California, maybe even like Southern California coast, just some weak shower storm returns there. Play the forecast forward though, you can see that coverage increasing toward dinner time across the Colorado River Valley. Showers and storms for the southeast, a little bit better overnight into Thursday night across the Willamette Valley. Some showers, maybe a rumble of thunder here. Precipitation increasing across Utah, northwest Arizona, the Grand Canyon. Maybe some showers getting in the lower Colorado River Valley Friday morning. And then by Friday afternoon, there's that low coming quickly along that shortwave trough out of Canada, bringing precipitation showers to the Great Lakes. Again, not a lot, but you sneak under one of these little stronger showers here, you could get maybe 0.2 of an inch. And look at all the convection across the southeast associated with that trough. It's now, once that trough hits that warm, Gulf and Western Atlantic water, we're expecting this to light up, kind of like a Christmas tree, and help to form that coastal low, which is going to sneak up the mid-Atlantic, bringing rainfall to this corridor here. I can't keep, there's one, what do we call it? I think this was 1, this was 2, this was 3, this was 3, and this was 4. So you can see all these different precipitation makers ongoing across the continental U.S. Where don't we have one? In this corridor here, which has gone over drier, and maybe here, which got that rainfall just recently this week. Now, if I switch this over just to the total accumulation over the next 60 hours, kind of 2.5 days here, see the Willamette Valley, the Seattle-Tacoma area getting up near an inch of rainfall, Four Corners region, Utah, Wasatch Range, northwest Arizona, the lower Colorado River Valley getting anywhere from like 1/4 of an inch up over an inch in some of the higher elevations here. And across the Midwest, what was like a blip on the radar, so to speak, in the forecast on Tuesday, well, you're actually getting up close to like a 1/2 inch across Wisconsin, underneath some of those showers in Illinois, getting close to like 0.25, 0.3, all the way over into like Michigan, Indiana, northwest Ohio. At least something to keep an eye on, maybe kind of spoiling the day a little bit on Friday and early Saturday for that region there. Do you want to jump over? Let's look at the ECMWF. That'll allow us to get further out into the forecast. I'll make this valid as like Friday. See that upper level trough across the Willamette Valley. Precipitation associated with Priscilla across the Four Corners region. I think this was 3 and this was 4. So play this forecast forward through Saturday. Then to Sunday morning, you can see additional precipitation over the Four Corners, Arizona, even getting into New Mexico. That trough now onshore across the Intermountain West. Much of Montana getting in the way of precipitation, Canadian Prairie a little bit as well. And there's that coastal low. This is by very early Sunday morning, 2 a.m. Eastern time. Heavy rain now falling in eastern North Carolina, the mid-Atlantic. That climbs up the coastline into Delaware and New Jersey, back over the northern plains, seeing a deep low pressure system form along the border. Potentially snow on the backside of this in Montana, Saskatchewan, like Saskatoon. And we're going to watch that snow, at least from the ECMWF forecast, climb up here into like the Yorkton area, like Foam Lake. Rain for Manitoba. Weak cold front stretching south of it with a lack of return flow out of the Gulf. Not expecting a ton of precipitation down the line here across the Midwest. But still, this is all the way like early Monday morning, still seeing some precipitation associated with Priscilla and that second system behind it getting into the Four Corners region. In the center of that trough back over Oregon and Washington now, bringing rainfall potentially to the Sacramento Valley, San Francisco area Monday, Tuesday. It's kind of early in our water year, but precipitation now unfolding across the central coast of California. This is Tuesday very early. Taking into Wednesday, snow in the Sierras now all the way through Southern California. This could be an impressive early season rain event for California all the way through Tuesday. And as that trough now exits finally, we get a low pressure system developing next week. This would be along the Red River of the North, Minnesota, North Dakota, bring rainfall all the way into Iowa. But all the while, so I followed every one of those precipitation makers, still dry in a lot of kind of little corridors here, kind of exclude the coastal low. Saw that little low track through the upper Midwest stays wet, but an area in here is going over drier. And so if we look at the 10-day precipitation anomalies from the ECMWF, California very wet, that makes sense. The Four Corners very wet, the upper Midwest, Northern Plains, coastal low along the mid-Atlantic, even into areas like Florida. But in between that, Illinois down through Texas, we call the Arklatex area, Louisiana, Arkansas, the Tennessee Valley staying dry over the next 10 days. Now, curiously, I mentioned that the North Pacific jet stream was likely going to impart some uncertainty into the forecast. If we were to jump over and show you the GFS over that same time period, I'm going to go quickly because it looks very similar to the ECMWF, even so far as like Sunday evening, getting that snow into Saskatchewan, rain more so over into Manitoba. See, there's the border. We're going to see where that cutoff line is for the snow, but chances increasing for snow here in Canada. Four Corners continue to stay wet on Monday. But as we get out into next week, remember that second low pressure system I talked about tracking through the upper Midwest? Remember I mentioned like North Dakota, Minnesota on Wednesday and Thursday? This is like Tuesday and Wednesday. It's tracking through Minnesota here, but that low, instead of being like up here, is down here. It has a better southern component to it. Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, stretching maybe a weak cold front even getting into Texas. And that forms a decent system all the way down here into like Illinois at the end of next week, getting rainfall all the way down here into the Gulf Coast states. So the ECMWF launched that low much further to the north, the GFS taking a weaker low through this quarter here, and that would bring more rainfall to that much drier area I just talked about. So if you look at the 10-day precipitation anomaly from the GFS, much more mixed in that kind of drier pocket, if you will. Now, areas that higher confidence we're going to stay dry, unfortunately, this corridor here, maybe portions of the Tennessee Valley, depending on how that weak low tracks through the middle part of the country here. And then pretty good agreement on that coastal low, flooding concern for portions of the Four Corners region, maybe even like Tucson, California wetter in that GFS forecast as well. If we look at temperatures, well, as we get that low developing next week, coming off the front range, warmer in the central part of the country, even up into the Midwest, cooler on the back side of the system. I'm jumping ahead to the 5 to 10 days because we look so closely already at those minimum temperatures over the next 5 to 7 anyway. But look at how much colder we are next week for California and the Canadian Prairie. I mean, overnight lows in California maybe getting down into like the high 40s in the Central Valley. And some of these forecasts warmer out ahead of that system as it comes through. And then some big question marks going forward, as there often has been in October. At least the ECMWF ensemble and the GFS ensemble in better agreement for colder air in the middle. Let's call this the third week of October, the 18th through the 23rd. The AIFS, which has been on an island for all of October, is actually in decent agreement. It's not as cold, but it's certainly not this. It doesn't look like this, right? Getting into the 10 to 15 days. This is, again, the 19th through the 24th from the AIFS. So better chance for a proper frost and freeze event getting through that third week of October. The reason for that, if we play this forecast forward, this is the ECMWF ensemble. There's that upper level low I mentioned influencing that coastal low in the southeast. Here's this trough that's parked across the western U.S., bringing temperatures down here, shooting off some of these low pressure systems through the upper Midwest. As we get to the 18th, you'll notice this trough here off the coast of the U.S. is entrenched. It actually strengthens a bit, and that brings some colder air into New England. Get some colder air here coming on with another trough potentially next weekend. And we generally keep the flow kind of in this direction here, and that's allowing some colder air to build in here. Obviously cold air in the next 5 to 10 days in the Canadian Prairie. But curiously, the ECMWF ENS shows this is a lot of momentum for this far out in the forecast. If I look at, we are 15 days out in the forecast. We rarely see colors getting down this deep into the color bar from the ECMWF ensemble. We're usually pretty washed out at this point. So I was kind of surprised to see this from the ensemble. You could see a very fast jet stream coming in between here. So I was kind of curious. Once I saw that this morning, I jumped over and looked at the AFS, and I put it out all the way to 15 days. And look at that as an impressive equatorward shift in the jet stream, which would be very strong north of Hawaii now, pointed right at the Pacific Northwest, maybe even like Northern California. Now, whenever we have big Pacific jet extensions like that, we tend to actually warm up quickly in the middle part of the country. You can think of it, there's like a ton of momentum tends to break on the Rockies, allows these low pressure systems to shoot up here, bringing warmth up into Canada, up into the northern plains, upper Midwest. That's likely to occur after that cool down that we're expecting between the dates of the 18th and the 23rd. So it wouldn't shock me just quickly looking at this forecast here if that cool down that we're expecting that third week of October, roughly a week and a half from now, isn't quickly followed by yet another warm up. Kind of more of that same playbook. That is an impressive shot of momentum out of the Pacific. And actually what I think is happening here is something that we talk about in winter fairly often. It can play a role in fall, certainly as well. And it's called a positive East Asian mountain torque event. I know it's a mouthful. And what's happening here, what's creating all that momentum in the jet stream in the North Pacific that I just showed you from the AFS, from the ECMWF ensemble. Heck, let's see if we can find it in the GFS. I'm going to go all the way back here. Let's do GFS ensemble. If you want those 500 millibar height anomaly forecasts, you have to hit on North America here. And let's play this forecast forward from the GFS ensemble. And I'm going to go quickly. I'm going to wash over a lot of this. I apologize, but there, I'm all the way out at 300. Look at how deep. I mean, that is one of the more impressive 3 model agreements from those 3 that we look at that far out that you'll find in the forecast, frankly. I mean, those are, for an ensemble forecast that is inherently, we look at these intentionally to see a number of different, opinions on where this 500 millibar height forecast, to see that much agreement is pretty impressive. And what's causing this, keep an eye on this high pressure system here over Siberia. This is northern Russia. I know it's kind of hard to see where we're at. Here's India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan. All right, I'm going to play this forward. Keep an eye on this high pressure system. And let's remember that there is a mountain range extending south across the central part of Russia. Here's the Urals, the Ural Mountains, and then there's this massive Tibetan and Himalayan plateau here. So if you can think about it, there's almost like this vertical barrier in Asia. Include the Himalayas, include the Tibetan Plateau, include the Urals. And remember that as I play this forecast forward, because we're going to watch this high pressure system. This is the 13th, 14th, 15th. Now the 18th. Now we've placed this high east of those higher elevations in Central Asia. So this high pressure system now on what we'll call the leeward side, downwind of that barrier. If I play the forecast into the 19th and 20th, I mean, this high pressure is stretching all the way from the lee side of the Himalayas to the lee side of the Urals. And what this is going to do, the high pressure system, remember, this is going to force air away from it. That's what high pressure systems are. Low pressure systems like this next potential typhoon, they're going to draw air in. And so the air is going to want to push westward away from this high. And it's going to be pushing on the very high elevations of the Tibetan Plateau, which are like 15 to 20,000 feet. Himalayas, of course, up near like 30,000 feet. Urals a little bit smaller than that, but nonetheless, that pushing is going to occur all along the Asiatic continent. And the Earth is spinning on this map, relative to this map, this way. Right? The sun rises in the east, it's spinning this way. And this high pressure system is actually going to be pushing on the Earth against that rotation. Believe it or not, this H here, this high pressure is going to be working against the rotation of the Earth. And it's going to try to slow down the spin of the Earth around the 18th to the 20th of October. And the Earth atmosphere system, that is the total globe, if you combine the physical Earth with the air above it, is that momentum, that spin is conserved. So in order to make up for this lost spin of the Earth, the atmosphere has to increase its spin. And to do that, it's going to increase the amount of wind going in that direction. It's going to say, okay, you've stolen some of my spin of the Earth. I'm going to speed up to make up for it, help out my buddy. And so if we play the forecast for the Pacific jet stream forward, here's the 10th, 11th, 12th. We actually have, if we look how long here, it's going to help embed some of that uncertainty in the jet stream. We'll watch that occur. Big ridge up over Alaska here, Anchorage. It's going to dive down into a trough here across the western U.S. This is what we talked about Monday, Tuesday of next week. That's going to spit out a low somewhere here across the upper Midwest. Remember, the GFS headed further to the south, so that's how long influencing next week's forecast. If we look at the Pacific jet stream on the 15th, I wouldn't call it weak, but it's not strong at this point. Coming off of Japan, a little bit of a jet streak here. We get out into like 16, 17. Now it's getting, I would say pretty weak, extending from British Columbia back toward Hokkaido, northern Japan. A little bit of a jet streak here over Japan. Here's the 17th, 18th. Okay, remember the 18th is when there it is, that high is setting up all along Eastern Asia, pushing against the Himalayas. 19th and 20th, that's when it really got going. Look at that Pacific jet stream. There's why the ECMWF ensemble, the GFS ensemble, the ECMWF AIFS, which runs off a whole different paradigm, we're all in such good agreement. Look at that Pacific jet extension. Deep low, 970 near Alaska. I mean, this is a strong enough jet extension that we could be talking about an atmospheric river in the Pacific Northwest in like the last week of October. What this also means is look at the ridge downstream over the central U.S. If I just jump over and show you the ECMWF AIFS forecast for temperatures like late October, I mean, just impressive warmth across the interior of the U.S. Now that's the AIFS. Let's do the ECMWF proper. If I take that out, again, here's the 17th, 16th, 17th week jet stream. We get that high setting up east of the elevation, and bang, look at the extension. This one even further south, again, maybe even talking about an AR event for Northern California or Oregon here, and then warmth downstream of that. Now, as we work through this Pacific jet extension later in October, like the 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th, as it breaks down, could very well see a big pattern change in the U.S. Maybe those colder temperatures return near Halloween. That's not out of the cards here, but it's going to be an interesting story to watch this play out about a week and a half, 2 weeks from now. The MJO, again, making its transit. We've talked about this week in through phases 1, 2, and 3, kind of curiously getting into 3 and 4, maybe late October, the 23rd, 24th. We'll just go look at climatology as a guide there. I took this out. Phase 3, last week of October, tends to be actually a little bit colder for the Midwest. I have a ridge here near Bermuda. So at least supporting maybe later in October behind that Pacific jet stream extension, getting a little bit colder. If I were to take this forecast all the way out, like phase 4 in early November or late October, that cold air signal still there for the Midwest, getting into New England now, getting into that last week of October, maybe even the first week of November, if that MJO gets all the way over into phase 4. So a lot to look at as we go through the next 2 weeks, certainly in October. I'll end it there today, getting close to time. But hope you learned something, and Eric will talk with you all on Friday morning.